Hi guys and girls, and thanks for joining us again today on another Team LRF podcast. And today I'm joined by Ifbb Pro Joe Brightman. Joe, how you doing?
I'm good, mate. How are you?
Yep, all good, all good, all good. And we were chatting just before we came on air. Joe, just back from Dubai.
Just back from Dubai, yeah.
Fresh. That's not a Dubai tan, though.
No, I think this is actually still nice and flush from earlier.
Yeah,
That finished me off.
Yeah, for sure, man. Have you started introducing it again now? Have you?
It came in. It came in 4 weeks ago, and then obviously I went away and didn't take it with me, and I've come back and I'm like, I'm not wasting time. I'm going to go straight back in at 5 grams, and it's finished me off today.
Yeah, I bet, man.
It's horrible.
Yeah, but so for Joe, those people who listen to this podcast and don't know who you are, don't know your competitive journey, obviously a few years ago you turned pro, you had your pro debut season last season. Just explain briefly sort of how long you've been competing and what your competitive journey is.
So I first competed when I was 21, so 7 years ago now. Very amateur level. That was at you might as well have called it like a fitness contest at Body Power. It was one of them ones. I was always into sport, but I never really found any sport I was particularly good at. Like I didn't play at a high level with anything, and then I sort of found bodybuilding. And I think I came second in that show, and I was just like, oh, I think I might be all right at this. So I was like, I'll do it again. I think a couple of years passed, and I did UKBFF, won that show. Still like self-coach at this point, making all the mistakes that everyone made. And then that year, I think I won the junior men's physique in the Welsh show. So I got then invited to the Arnold's and the Diamond Cup, which was obviously pretty cool back then. Didn't do overly well at the Arnold's, but then the Diamond Cup went all right. I think I came like top 5, and obviously at this point I was still natural, and I thought everyone was because I had to sign that little waiver. So I took that as gospel, but obviously I wasn't. So when I found out, I was pretty proud. I was like, yeah, I think we could do something here. So I think another 2 years passed, and it was at that time I was like, I think I might need to go assisted here if I want to be any good. So 2018 was my first like Ifbb Pro Qualifier. That was 2 bros who sort of just burst onto the scene. But I went abroad and did the Amateur Olympia in Spain, which was an amazing show actually. I think that was where I met you actually. I think I met you. So, I ended up coming second there, and that really was when I was like, oh wow, like I might be onto something here. So I think the guy that beat me won my class, won the overall, then went on to win the pro show the next day. So I was like, if he wasn't there, we might have been looking at a different result. I didn't get my pro card that year. I think I went home, did 2 bros, and came 5th, which I was gutted about. That was probably one of my low points. I was like, oh shit. It was almost like this big peak, and then all got crushed. But I went back into off season, and that was actually the first year that I competed the direct year after. And obviously I think I'd reached out to you in that meantime. So we did relatively short off season, to be fair, I'd say, and then went into that prep, and then was it 4 or 5 shows? I think it was 4 shows.
I'm sure it was the fifth one you got the card.
Yeah. So then we did all those shows, and I still to this day when people ask me, I think I should have won it on that first one in Watford.
100%, mate. 100%. I remember seeing that day and just like sitting in the crowd, and I'm quite vocal in the crowd anyway, and I remember not being vocal and being like, you've won it, like all day. Yeah.
I still like I said, still to this day, I think that I should have won it on that day, but I didn't even win the class. I came second. I think it was the guy that I'd actually beaten before as well, and then obviously he went into the overall and did nothing. But it was what it was. That was quite a special show for me, I think, because I've still to that day I've not competed on UK soil, and I wasn't that well known back then. So it was cool to have some people there. So yeah, that meant a lot. But then we did that, and went to Ireland. Again, that was a weird show. There was only one person in my class, and he beat me. And then I think we had 2 weeks off. Spain, Benidorm. That one really was the one where it was at that point that I think I knew I was going to get it if I just carried on. I was saying that was like my first class win, went into the overall and came second in the overall after getting put in the middle. And it was at that point that I was like, I think we can do this. And then, obviously Denmark, I think that was another 2 weeks later. I just went out on my own and we did it finally. So yeah, I guess that's actually my amateur history. Then another 2 years away from the stage, and then went over to America to do 3 pro shows this year or last year, and then the best one was obviously top 10 New York, that was always my aim, I guess. It was a weird season for me because I think the whole experience was one that I really looked forward to, and it felt like it was going to be like living my dream. And instead, I think because of COVID, I sort of went out, was a bit isolated for a lot of it, and ended up, it wasn't really, I'd almost had a bit of taste of life at the end of it. But upon reflection, like I said, that was all I wanted to do. Top 10 first pro show, and to do it in New York was cool. So yeah, now obviously looking towards classic.
Yeah. So when you went through those days of being a natty, Joe, do you think that was actually advantageous for you to go and compete as a natty to start with?
100%. Like that would be like my number one bit of advice to like anyone who joins me as a client who's thinking about it. Like anyone who even asks me on Instagram or anything, like I will discourage probably 95% of people to take steroids. Like I just don't think for most people it's ever going to be a worthy swap in terms of the risk. And I think unfortunately I think it's getting so much better now with like the people that are putting information out, and it's much more mainstream. And obviously, like you say at the start, like people are openly talking about it. But I think to sort of start your like anabolic journey or whatever without having done like a proper diet or competed, and knowing that you even love the process first, I think is a big risk. Because I think, yeah, I mean, I would hate for someone to start taking anabolics and do a prep, realize they hated it, and then, worst case scenario, that all their hair falls out and they realize they can't have kids. Obviously, that's a massive oversimplification and quite dramatic, but it could happen. So I think at least it's worth going into that process naturally, making sure you enjoy it, making sure you're any good at it as well. I think it's quite a big one. It's quite a brutal one, but I think it's important to understand that, because then you can sort of work out, is this worth it for me?
Yeah. And when you decided to swap over to the dark side per se, Joe, was it a thing that you said, right, let's just do it? Or were you sort of saying, I'm in a RM, I'm on an RM, and then you went ahead and did it?
I think probably from the start of like training, I always knew that I wasn't going to be against it if it was going to become worth it. It was funny because the guy that I sort of grew up training with, his dad was a copper, and he was like, my dad will kill me, I'm never going to do it. And I was like, all right, fair enough. I was like, I might one day. So it was always sort of in the back of my mind. I was never against the idea, but I think I just wanted to make sure it was worth it. And then, yeah, in terms of finally making that decision, it was literally a pragmatic one for me. I felt like I'd proved myself as a physique athlete. I thought I knew I was kind of good enough, or could be good enough one day. But it was a very matter-of-fact conversation with myself, like, are you going to do this naturally? Probably not. Almost certainly not. Could you do it assisted? Probably. So I'll give it a go. And I think, by that point, I was already dedicating my whole life to bodybuilding. I still worked a 9 to 5, but I was living in London, never went out. I got home and went to the gym. That was it. People go for drinks after work and planning holidays to Ibiza and stuff. Like, I just wasn't doing any of that. I was just training. I was just training and eating, and that was kind of what I dedicated my life to. So, yeah.
And rewinding back to the amateur scene, Joe, because there'll be a lot of guys who listen to this as amateurs. You were a good amateur. You were a very good amateur. In international shows, it was first, second. And I think me and you, Joe, we have a very similar mindset in the fact that we don't just want to win, we want to crush people. Like, we want to absolutely be completely undeniable every show and everything that we ever do. When you're getting seconds, and when you're getting first, and when you're getting, even a fifth at the two bros, and you're not winning, what's the process that goes through your mind? Are you somebody who like, you just want to say, fuck this, I'm going to go and smash it next time? Or do you sometimes do feel a bit like, fuck me, is this really me? Is this really for me?
I think I probably have a bit of a strop for a bit. I remember after that two bro show in particular, all my family had come, my friends had come to watch me. We had like that was like the end of my season, so we had like an evening out that night, and that was all great. But the next morning, I just needed to get up and like go and be on my own for a bit. I think I got on my bike and I just cycled off for an hour or so, just to sort of gather my thoughts. I think the first thing is like coming to that realization, especially when it's the end of your season. You're like, oh, that was my last chance, or my last chance for now. So very much I need to sort of gather my thoughts a bit. I think if you're in the middle of your season or at the start of it, so let's take the Watford one, for example, like, thought I was really good on that day. Felt like a lot of promise. I think I got a bit emotional because like my family were there, but it was very much for me like, well, there's another one, and that's going to be fine. And if anything, that sort of encouragement from that show, I think it gave me at least like the fire to carry on. I don't think at any point in that sort of pro card winning season was I close to a breaking point. But I just put so much pressure on myself, because I think we probably had the conversation. Like I said, I was still working. Even then, I was still working 9 to 5. And if I'd have not got the pro card at that Denmark show or that year, like, it's expensive. I couldn't keep affording to compete at that time. And I think the pressure I put on myself was just like, you need to get this, otherwise your dream's kind of over. So that probably during that season, there was no point where I was, being like, is this for me? But I had sort of set myself a deadline, if that makes sense, in terms of like, if this doesn't happen, like, I probably will have to stop, because, something has to take precedent at some point.
How do you deal with that intrinsic pressure then, Joe?
Oh, probably quite well, I'd say. I think I speak about this a lot, like particularly like Josh and stuff. Like when you're on Instagram and you've got all these followers and they're all telling you you're going to win or you're good enough to win, and if anything, it's all compliments, but it can be really hard to just keep hearing it all the time, because the bottom line is, like I always say this to everyone, you can turn up to a show and there doesn't matter whether there's 50 people better than you or one person better than you. Like, if you didn't win, you didn't win. And that can be like a really hard pill to swallow. So I think in terms of that pressure, it's got to be about doing exactly what you have to do every single day. And unfortunately, in this subjective sport, it sometimes does come down to what happens on the day. I think once you get to that point of sort of realizing that you're good enough, you can come to terms of, like, it might just be a matter of time. I think there's a lot of that nowadays as well. Like, I see a lot of the guys that are winning pro cards, and I think they're almost made to earn their right, there's not many people, I don't think, that just turn up and win it first time nowadays. In the amateur scene.
No, for sure. And even Charlotte, who works for TeamLRF, she won the Amateur Olympia, she's won the Ben Wheeler, she's gone on and won about 4 or 5 pro qualifiers and not quite got it yet. And again, something that I say to her is something that I was saying to you at the time. It's just a matter of time. You are that close. You just need to be in front of that judge on that day that says, I love that physique.
Yeah, 100%. I think you have to be quite honest with yourself as well. I think there's a lot of people that are probably competing a bit before their time if their goal is pro card. I think this is a debate as well that I have with clients sometimes. The whole competing process can be quite an addictive one, and one that you want to be up there, because let's face it, like, a lot of competitors are maybe PTs or online coaches as well, or aspiring to be, and they know it sort of helps their profile. But I think rushing that competing process is a tricky one. So I think, like, for Charlotte, for example, like, she's there, right? Like you say, it's going to be just the right place at the right time at the moment. But there will be guys that I think, unfortunately, or guys and girls that maybe come in 5th and 6th, but still going back in a year's time. And I don't quite think, everyone else is spending time improving. So if you weren't there then, chances are you might just need a bit longer. So I think having that sort of honest conversation with yourself, and probably with your coach as well, I think a lot of that is really important. A coach who's going to tell you, you might not be there, and that's fine. Like, it's a long game, I think, competing for a lot of people.
I think if you're in it for the right reasons, you understand it's a long game. You understand that you ain't going to rock up and, I was saying to someone the other day, there ain't that many Andre Jews. That there really ain't that many Andre Jews who win your first pro qualifier, win your first pro show, and you go to the Olympia and you place 5th at the Olympia. No. But that's an anomaly. But people, through probably social media, think that's the norm. And they think that's the norm when really it's an anomaly. And that's why it's great to hear your journey as an amateur, because that's more like the norm than what we see over social media.
Yeah. I think another person as well, I think obviously, Andre's going to get all the plaudits because he's in front of so many eyes. Like, I don't know how many millions of followers he's got now. So like you say, people think it's the norm, but almost it's like people like Darren, for example, Darren Farrell, who like over the last year or 2 years has absolutely transformed, like, on another level. And that is just purely down to him. He just doesn't want to give up. He's absolutely in love with the process. And I don't think he would mind me saying this, but I think his pro card winning physique, probably in most shows, probably wouldn't win that pro card, but he's just qualified for the Olympia, and he absolutely deserves to. I saw him out there last week in Dubai, and he's blown me away with his progress over the last couple of years. And I think, it's like that journey needs the light shining on it a bit more, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And the thing is, our coach Darren, when he was over here in the UK, he was one of my boys, and he was very good friends with a guy called Ben, who was far superior in terms of genetics, in terms of structure. Ben was getting the top places at the British finals when, like the UKBFF, then there was like 40 guys in a class, 50 guys in a class, and he was coming like top 2 and top 3. And Darren was in all honesty getting last call out, but he come off stage and he was like, I loved it. And sometimes that's a different perspective, isn't it? Where you get last call out, but you're like, you know what, I fucking love that. And those are the guys that are going to stay in the sport for a long time. And yeah, like you say, it's going to the Olympia.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's like you say, in terms of people looking for a normal journey, I think don't be looking at probably look at them for inspiration and stuff. But like you say, that's 1 in a million. To do that well that quickly, I think it's important to put a bit of respect on like journey like Darren's, for example, and he's a perfect example of like showing what can be done if you just like dedicate some time to it, because it's incredible, really.
Yeah. And you touched on a couple of times, Joe, that you were actually working, like when we were working together, you were working at 9 to 5, like, and it wasn't a low profile 9 to 5, it's a John Lewis, you're busy. A lot of the times you were doing overtime or turning up early and staying late. Like, how did you tackle that fact that you were running a corporate job with wanting to be the best bodybuilder that you could be?
I give the same answers every time people ask me. I think it's pretty boring, but it's like people need to hear it. It all just comes down to preparation. And once again, like it just comes down to that complete dedication to like a process. As I said, like I was working that job, and there was just no chance that I was ever doing anything after work other than going to the gym. And when it came down to prep, I always think when your back's against the wall in a situation like that, I perform almost better, I think. So I think you'll hear loads of people talk about this, particularly coaches. Like they go on to prep and they feel like they get more done, even though they're low on energy and low on mood and stuff. And I think it's because you've got so many things on your list to tick off that you have no choice but to get them done. So, my day when we were doing that would look like probably get up at 5:30, 6, maybe 5:45. I would take my bag and my food that was already made from the night before, go to the gym that was near work, do my cardio, which was, I think at one point it was up to like 45 minutes or an hour, maybe some abs if I could fit it in. And then I'd go to the change room, get changed into my work stuff that I'd obviously pack, like I said, get to work that day. I was probably quite lucky in that it was a job that allowed me to eat. There's never anyone, unless I had a meeting, there was never anyone telling me you can't go and eat that. Like, yeah. I was able to do that, which was great. But it would be work throughout the morning, or probably fast for a lot of the morning because food wasn't that high. Eat at lunch, go out for a walk because I needed steps to get in, and then finish work. It would be going back to that gym that I went to in the morning to train, and then I'd get the train home. I think I'd get home at probably between 8 and 8:30 every night, and then do it all again, and then be in bed for 10 p.m. again. So it was very much just about having each bit of my day planned out and making sure that I knew what I needed to do to get the next day done. And almost, I think the perfect example of that is like at the weekend, you almost feel a bit lost. Without that, those hours of 9 to 5:30, or I think it ended up being more like 8 till 5 for me. It was like filling the days was almost a bit like, I have maybe a different meal at a different time first thing, and suddenly I'm a bit like, oh, that's weird. So yeah, I think like it all comes down to preparation. And I'll hand on heart say that I probably had 1 hour of free time, that whole day for however many months I was competing for. And that was fine, because the worst thing, I couldn't think of anything worse than not getting that pro card that year. I wasn't up at night because I was so exhausted, but if there was one thing that was going to keep me up at night, it would have been the thought of not ending that season with that card, because at that point for me, that would have been it with competing, or at least I said to myself it would. So yeah.
And since then, Joe, you swapped over to full-time coaching, and I've been lucky enough to follow your journey from like the Amateur Olympia a couple of years ago. It's got to be, the Amateur Olympia's got to be 4 years ago now, isn't it?
Yeah, 2018. Yeah, probably. Yeah, just over probably 3.5.
Yeah. So I've been lucky enough to follow your journey since then and see everything. And I remember speaking to you when you were coming down to LRF and saying like, what you're doing for work, and the conversation and the gist was there, but it was never really a proper conversation. It was more like blasé. And then I know obviously you built things up during lockdown, and then you went into your own coaching business now, which by the sounds of it, from what I watch your YouTube channel, is going very well. You've got somebody working under you. Moving from that corporate into your own employed status, how did that affect training, dieting, and stuff like that? Has it made it better? Has it made it, have you taken your habits from corporate and gone and taken them to like a coaching role as well?
I'd say first, like when I first made that change, I was probably, like I just said there about the weekends, I was probably just a bit lost. And it wasn't until someone said to me, like, you're going to need to like block your diary out or block your calendar out like you used to do at work or whatever, so you know what you're doing at certain times of day. I will be the first to admit I'm not a very organized person. I've tried to be, and I'm just not. You know how some people will tell you this is the way to do things, and sometimes for you just have to find a slightly different way. So I would say initially I was a bit lost. It's a case of like getting my work done when I could, training probably when I could, and that might mean sometimes I might train at 11, sometimes I might train at 4, which isn't great. I don't think. Like I think having that routine and the same, or at least move a bit of flex maybe in the day is probably the best way to set yourself up. But I'd say that as soon as I started working out, when do I like working? When do I like training? Basically setting my day up to make it as easy for myself to succeed as possible. I think that's something I've been probably quite good at. I recently read that Atomic Habits book, and I was reading through it and just nodding, because it was like, these are things that I knew I had already done. I took a lot from that time with John Lewis, and I brought it into, I wouldn't say I brought too much of it, but it's like transferable skills. It's that ability to start working out. So I like working, I think I'm quite like you, like I like working first thing. I like to get up, not eating, just have a coffee and like try and work as much as I can in that first sort of 3-4 hours of the day before people are up. Clients are messaging me, maybe there's more to look at on Instagram. So I like getting up, doing as much work as possible, and then I guess my day largely revolves around training. So I'll try and train after a couple of meals, so anywhere between sort of 10 and 2, and then I come back, do a bit more work, which probably isn't quite as productive as I'd like. So I'll try to get the heavy stuff done in the morning, and then I normally try and have an hour or two to chill out before bed. But that's a weird one. I remember thinking when I because like you say, I sort of built it up in lockdown, and I was doing that alongside my 9 to 5. And I remember thinking, God, I'm gonna have so much time, and it was just the total opposite. Someone said to me the other week, they said you will take as long as you have to get a task done, and never. I feel like that's such a true saying. It kind of plays into that prep thing. When you've got so much to do, you have to get it done. You find a way. When you've got all this time, you almost fill that time with stuff, which is definitely something I need to improve on.
A couple of books, Joe, that I really like that might work for you is Routine Equals Results by a guy called Rob Moore. Really, really good book. And also, you said there about the it will only take you as long to get a task done as what you have. There's a great quote in the 4-Hour Work Week. I don't know if you've ever read that book.
I've got that. I've not read it yet.
It's a good book. Like, it is a good book, but it almost gives a false representation of how much you have to work. But he says, if I gave you 20 tasks to do in 2 days, how long would it take you to do 20 tasks? 2 days. Yeah. If I gave you 20 tasks to do in 2 hours, how long would it take you to do 20 tasks? 2 hours. So it is definitely that just made me think of the 4-Hour Work Week, that little saying there, because that's sort of what he drums into you as well during that book. But it's a good book, though, to be fair.
Yeah, I've got it. I'll get through it. That's another thing though, like the whole you get this entrepreneurial stuff like forced on you, and reading that doesn't really do it for me that much. Like I almost have to force myself a bit to read. And it's one of the things that I've month after month said, you've got to get better at this. And I wrote it down on my thing today, read 10 pages.
Yeah.
And I do struggle with it.
Have you read 10 pages yet?
No, I'll do it when I get in bed, I think.
You know what, Joe? Like one of the reasons I was going to bring you on this podcast is because of what you've developed in terms of a coaching system and process in the time that you've done it is incredible. Like, and I'm not just talking about number of clients, like, because I know you grafted at that, and I want to talk about social media in a bit, because from the shift of working with you to where you're at now, like I see your social media as a full-time job. Like how active you are on it, how with your YouTube channel, with your clients and stuff like that. Like I see that social media side of things almost as like your full-time job as well. But one of the things that you taught me, Joe, which I don't think I've ever said publicly, I might have said it to you, but I've never said publicly, was that when you left TeamLRF and you went to Cal, and I saw some of the things that Cal was doing with you, and I was always very confident, and I still am very confident in my coaching ability, but I was never confident in the technical aspect in terms of, right, I see that you're doing all these sheets and these processes, and I'm like, I'll be honest, to start with, I was like, I don't need that. I don't need that side of things. I'm a good coach. I know what I'm doing. I can get people in shape. I'm winning shows. I don't need that. And as I see you start talking about it, I don't know if you remember, I actually dropped you a message and I said, can you tell me what the difference is? Because again, I don't think, and I don't want to do anyone a disservice here. I don't think there is much difference in the way that people coach in terms of coaching ability, get people in shape. But what I do see a difference in now is people like yourselves taking the coaching game to another level where everything's covered, everything's like automated. And that's why I asked you whether you took some things from the corporate into your coaching, because I've seen you guys like revolutionize the coaching industry. And that is, you know, that's no feat. That's incredible in the time that you've been involved in it. When you look at coaching, Joe, do you look at it like a business?
Yeah, I actually, now that you say that in terms of what I took from like John Lewis into how I've done a business, I think, forget the routine and stuff, but in terms of like what I deliver as a coach, the thing that I was noticing about coaching by and large is just like the presentation and the professionalism of a business. Obviously, I'd come from John Lewis, whereby to send out an email to however many millions of people is on their email list, there can't be any mistakes. It has to look nice. The process goes through sign off after sign off after sign off. There's no spelling mistakes. There's no nothing. So it has to be perfect, or as perfect as possible. And I guess that was drilled into me because of the department I worked in. And I guess that is really, in terms of like a soft skill, maybe a hard skill, what I might have taken into coaching. In terms of stuff that I learned, like the automation of like spreadsheets and stuff, I'm not that great at like spreadsheets, but what I did notice is that I was a lot better than a lot of the coaches stuff that I was seeing. So I guess what I tried to bring to coaching was like, yeah, like a professionalism and a bit of fluff like around, just to like providing a service that looks nice. Because I think from my perspective, like I like things to look nice. I like my clothes. I like stuff like this and that. So I kind of wanted to, you know, spin that onto coaching and make sure that customers would pay me a fee and then receive their stuff and be like, oh wow, like that looks great. I've not seen that before and stuff like that. So yeah, I guess I did take a lot more from it than probably I just gave it credit for in the last answer. But I think that yeah, the service levels and stuff are definitely on another level. Now, I know we had that conversation about like Loom, for example, or I think it was Screencast back then. Move over to Loom, but I think there's where the market has become quite saturated. I know it's not completely saturated because people can still succeed in it, but there's definitely a gap still for like a nice looking service and combining that with an actual good coach. So, you know, what you said there, and I think I talk about this quite often on social media, is like, I think people are kind of missing a bit of a trick in terms of like at the absolute core of it, you need to be a good coach. Layer on top of that presentation, lay on top of that marketing, and you know, and then like sort of a continuous hunger to learn, and then you're probably going to be pretty good. And you might, well, and on top of that, an audience, you might be able to turn over some good numbers. But without some of them components, I think you do end up selling yourself short. So I think, yeah, definitely that I just think is the sort of evolution of a service and of an industry, I guess.
Sure. And in terms of a social media aspect, Joe, when you're on social media, I know you're still very authentic. Like I watch your story today, you're still very authentic. Do you look at social media as part of your business?
Yeah, it absolutely 100% is. I think what I've probably done well, and I think this is risky for some people because it just kind of depends how you're wired. Like I look at Tom, for example. So obviously I spend loads of time with Tom. Absolutely like polarizing character. Like a lot of people will either love him or they hate him. I think I'm pretty liberal in terms of like, I would like to think that not many people hate me for what I say, but I'm quite open about how I'm feeling and stuff. Like it's what you said today. So when I was looking back at, I watched my story back from last night when I was talking about like the flight and stuff. And in my head, I was like, oh, should you have said that you upgraded to business? And should you have, you know, because like there's a lot of stuff where people start to get a bit pissed off. And I keep a lot of things quite private that I think is kind of maybe not necessarily everyone's business in terms of like maybe what I'm doing with my money, because at the end of the day, it's mine. Because I've been bitten in the arse before. Like people have messaged me and had a go at me. And I'm a bit like, not really your place to say, but I understand, you know. So yeah, I would say it's absolutely a part of my business. I think it is just like an extension of me more than anything. And I think that's done more good than bad for my business, because I think something I've always understood is that by and large, people invest in like you as a person. I think people are invested in me because I get a lot of people that inquire, and I have like a box, like, why have you inquired for Team Brightman? A lot of them just say like, oh, I just liked you as a character, or I see that you're putting out good information and I feel like I click with you before I've even spoken to them. So I definitely think like being, you do have to watch what you say, but being as open as possible and probably just an honest representation of who you are as a person, alongside a bit of business acumen and a good service, is probably the way to go. Definitely from my experience.
Yeah, man. And you know, I still have that conversation with people all the time about actually how much people put out. Like, because someone like Jace, obviously, most people know who Jace is. Like, me and Jace are polar opposites. Like, he is somebody who has nice cars, has nice watches, has nice things. I don't own a single piece of jewelry. Like, I only wear complete strength and LRF. Like, you know, half the time I've cut down my jogging bottoms to wear them as shorts. Like, you know, like, and I don't have that nice thing, but he has an audience which are attracted to that, you know, that nicety, that I want to almost look like you. And I think you've capitalized on that on very well. Plus the fact that you've now shown not only that you're a good coach, but your service is, you know, from what I've seen, impeccable. Yeah. So
yeah. It's the last videographer I worked with has probably been one of the, like, a big influence on sort of how I've looked at my business and content. And he puts you in that like aspirational bracket. It's people, you look at like people like Mike Thurston, like they're just a person that people want to be, and therefore they're kind of interested in that content, which I always find is a bit of a weird like dynamic. I think probably what I do is maybe look at people that I, you know, admire in a certain way and try and pull something from that, rather than like, oh, I want to be that. But I understand how it's like attractive to look at, and at the end of the day, people just want to know what you're doing. People want to know what car you're driving, and it's a weird world, but it's definitely one to sort of be capitalized on if that's what you want to do. Like you say, in terms of like Jace, for example, something I noticed about him is just his like absolute relentlessness in terms of putting content out. I think I went on his page the other day and he'd done 4 posts in a day, and I was just like, oh my god. And I think there's a lesson in that, in terms of like maybe not necessarily being so polished with everything, because you know, some people they're not too worried about how their feed looks. Like Jace is a lot of like one of him and then 4 of his clients and then maybe a lift and stuff like that, whereas people can be a bit more calculated with it, and that almost holds you back, I think, sometimes.
Yeah. Again, one of the things with Jace is that he can rely on hundreds of results. You know what I mean? Like, I've been working with him since 2016. I say it's probably 6 years worth of results. But other guys, they don't have that. They don't have that. And again, when I noticed that you were coming up in the game, is that you understood, and I think you bought into the fact that I haven't got 55 transformations back here that I can use. But what I can show you is service. I can show you value. I can show you systems. I can show you processes. And that was great to watch. And I said, like, I always drop you the odd message to say, mate, this is wicked. Like, this is nice. This is good. Like, you know, we still communicate occasionally on socials and stuff, like when you're competing and that. But from an outsider's point of looking in, I was looking and thinking, this guy is going to do well, because he knows what he's got and he's working towards that. And to see you succeed now in that is fantastic. So yeah, man, like, all credit to yourself, man, because you've done that off your own back. Nowadays, people employ me and they say, Rob, help me get to 50 clients. I've got nothing. But you got to that bracket without any help, without any sort of guidance. So yeah, man, like fair play, man. Like, over the last couple of years, mate, like, not only physically but in business wise, like, it's been great to see, man, and great to watch.
I appreciate it, because I think a lot of the time I struggle to look back. That's something that I definitely think I need to get better at. It's just like reflecting at what's happened, because like you say, if I think about it, 2 years ago I was stuck at John Lewis on what I thought was, you know, hopefully going towards a good salary, and now it's a different world. And even so, I think the irony is that I'm still not quite happy with it, which I think is probably part and parcel of how it goes. But yeah, no, I appreciate it. And I think in terms of, you know, me not taking any help, it's not obviously entirely true. Like, I think in terms of like getting a coach, like, especially you were the first person I fully employed, and so to take that knowledge and information from yourself in terms of like, okay, this guy's turning a lot of people pro. Let me just go to him and see what I can get out of that. And then obviously moving to Cal, just a different perspective. And I think a lot of people, I think it's almost quite important for people to do that in terms of taking different perspectives, because I learned a lot from you and I learned a lot from Cal in terms of prepping people. Like I would have almost used your methodology to prep people between that, and then I've used some of yours and some of Cal's, and it's like picking from different people, you know, the parts that you maybe want to emulate more than others.
So yeah, you know what, mate, it's a lot of the time being humble enough to say that and look at that as well. And as I said, even like again, I remember dropping you that message and saying, mate, like, what is this guy doing that is so good? Like, because at the time as well, when you joined those guys, they weren't as big as what they were now. Yeah. But what I could see from them is a system and process that I didn't have. And as I said, like I always believe that if you're going to do something, try and be the best at it. And I looked at that and I thought, at the time, as I said, like a couple of years ago, you'll know me, Joe, I was a cocky geezer who was like, you know what, I'm going to fucking smoke everybody. And then I had to take a little bit of a step back and say, right, this guy's doing well. Tell me how to do that. And I still see that in your process. I still see that in your system. I still see the fact that you want to get better. And like I said at the start, I know you have a mindset of not only winning, but fucking going beyond winning and smashing people and smoking people. But yeah, as I said, like in terms of what you've been doing, man, it's been great. But yeah, to move on, Joe, I want to talk about the changeover to classic. Obviously, I've seen your physique again develop over the years. I think prior to your surgery, it's definitely the biggest and leanest I've seen you. What was you, 120 plus? Still pretty sharp.
I don't know what was going on there, honestly.
Yeah, but still pretty sharp at 120 plus as well.
Yeah, that like blow up period, sort of pre-surgery. I watched my physique transform from sort of being out in America to then coming home, obviously dropping to a cruise, and like I couldn't quite believe what was like unfolding in front of my eyes. I remember sending Cal pictures maybe 2 weeks after I got home training, and like I looked better then than I did. You know, I wasn't stage lean, but I looked 10 times better. Like my back had filled out. I think there was a point I was out in America actually, and I remember keep looking at my abs and thinking, why am I so washed out? And I had to look back at some pictures of when me and you competed. I actually looked back at that one from the Island show when I've got like this perfect like 6-pack abs, and I was like, I have got abs. I was like, where have they gone? So I had to sort of use that to look back on and remind myself you have kind of got what it takes. So I think I lost a lot of probably faith in myself whilst I was away, but yeah, when we got back, I think just a colossal drop in stress, a colossal change in sort of environment. And then obviously, yeah, once sort of health was in a good place, we just started pushing again. And in terms of getting back up to that 120, it was a lot of food. It was pretty low drugs because of obviously we didn't want to make the gyno potentially any worse in that 8-week period. And it's the first time I'd used like insulin, which I think now, again, weirdly enough, as we watch this sort of drug landscape or PEDS landscape change, we're now becoming more and more aware that actually, I remember, I don't know if I ever would have said to you, but I definitely said to myself, there's no way I'm ever going to need insulin. No chance. I will never need that drug. That's for super heavyweights. And now actually, I think the information is more so that, you know, if you're pushing this really high food, it actually might be pretty good for you. Yeah. In terms of like the stress in your pancreas and in terms of utilizing the food that you're putting in at the end of the day. So I'm sure that's got something to do with it in terms of like those quite like full-blown pictures. But yeah, that was a physique that I was definitely enjoying.
Yeah, and that look, Joe, is that what gave you the confidence to say, I want to do classic?
I think I've always had the confidence, or like I'll tell you what the decision came down to. I think I went out and I did those shows this year, and you've obviously been out to some US shows, and I don't know what your thought process has been, but I remember just looking at the depth of men's physique and being a bit almost like feeling a bit like delusional about what I was doing here. I felt probably it was a weird one, mate, because I looked to my left and my right, particularly in that New York Pro show, and I stood next to who went on to become the second best in the world this year, that Aaron Banks guy. And there's no difference in our size at all. In fact, I think in some of the poses I almost looked bigger than him from the front. From the back, though, he just had this alien-like back. and just a pop, and just everything all came together. And I think I was just like, I kind of had a realization. I was like, I'm not sure what more I can do here to become at that level in terms of men's physique. There was, there's poses in men's physique where I think you're quite weak, and there's poses in classic that I do that honestly I look at myself and I'm like, what you look like that. Like the front double, for example, like I just think that's one of the best shots I ever do, and that's why throughout all prep it's all I'm ever really posting. So I feel like it would be a disservice to myself if I sort of didn't go to classic. Another one,
you know who reminds me when you talk about the American guys, and he's only just got it right this year, is Emil Walker. He reminds me of those American looks, but he's only really turned it on this year. And he's been rewarded for that massively. But that, like, when I used to go to those American shows, like, these guys would turn to the rear, and it's almost like their lats would hang from their hips, and they're coming in so low, and they're so deep in that shot. And like you say, I'll be honest, when you look at the front shot, everyone's very similar. But when they turn to the rear, it's not just the guys from the States, it's the guys that are really, really good. You just see these lats that just hang like everyone's got high green lats. You know what I mean? They're just hanging from the bottom. And and like you say, like with some of your classic shots, even like your back double bicep, mate, like your symmetry on that shot is fantastic. You've got good arms as well, which make a massive difference in that shot. You've got good shoulders from men's physique. It's obviously then just bringing up them wheels, which I know for you are not bad anyway.
Yeah, I think, like I said, it was a combination of, I sort of got back home, felt probably a bit bitter from, obviously I was really excited after that first show. The second, the third one didn't go so well, but I think even if I was at my best, I'm not sure I would have stood close to many of them. I also saw a different side to men's physique out there, which was like the posing and stuff. Like they really go for it out there in particular, and that's not really me. I kind of got a bit sort of uncomfortable with it. I remember like my mum and dad would be watching the video live stream back and be like, you need to come out and like, do a bit more. And I'm like, it's just not me. All the twisting and turning and the showmanship, like fair play to them. But I would definitely be, in classic, one of those guys who just like, I just want to come out and just hit the shots and that be enough. Do you know what I mean? For people's jaws just to drop. So yeah, I guess it was a combination of sort of maybe falling out of love with physique a bit. Also, competing has a time limit for me. I don't know how many more years I've got left in me, and like I want to make sure that I give classic a good shot. And yeah, in terms of like what I need to improve on, it's definitely, I think my quads are all right. I think my hamstrings need probably a good another block of off season before they're any good, and even then they might not be, but we'll see. But yeah, in terms of the upper body, I feel quite confident. A lot of the time, I speak to Josh about it, and it's something I agree with. I think with classic, you kind of have it or you don't. And it's one of them ones where I think I've got the shape. It's just whether I can hang with people in terms of size. But based on these sort of Olympia placings, if you look at that young Polish guy, that Miracle Bear, I don't think he's a big guy, but he's, his shape is carrying him all the way to the top. So we'll see. Yeah.
For sure. And I know you touched on the showings out in the US, Joe. And again, always follow the journey. Always drop you a couple of messages before those shows. Could you talk us through those last few hours, man? Because I see you, mate, and I see you 12 hours out. I see you a day out, and I think this guy is peeled. Like this guy is nasty shredded, like inside out. And I know obviously pictures never do anyone justice, but I know you openly said you missed your mark. Tell us about that in terms of the feelings, the emotions, and then going on stage thinking, I'm not quite where I was, 12 hours ago.
Yeah, I think it was a weird one because for the New York Pro, I think probably on reflection, that probably was my best physique. I think unfortunately my tan wasn't quite dark enough, and if it was a bit darker, I might have done a little better. I don't want to put it down to that, but I think as any athlete would say, other than maybe like Jimmy Tonk, I would always like to be a bit leaner on stage. I think there's just always more to come off than you think, and I think I'll learn that this year because obviously I'll have to be absolutely skinned out. So we'll see about that. But yeah, I think New York Pro, obviously, I think was probably my best showing. I said would like to be a bit darker. Weirdly enough, probably 6 hours out of that show, I messaged Cal panicking saying I look like shit. And he was like, relax, you've got low blood pressure. Like once you get some salt in there and start pumping up, you'll be fine. And lo and behold, like I was. I think that was a big boost for me because I remember literally seeing myself come to life backstage, and I was excited to get up there. I really was. So that was cool. And then yeah, Milwaukee, Milwaukee, I think we tried to come in a bit tighter and instead just ended up looking a bit flat. I look back at those photos and I think you might have looked a bit leaner, but the skin wasn't tight. And I don't know if it was a combination at that point of, not sure what it was really. I think probably, like I say, either not quite full enough, or again, just maybe still not quite as lean as I needed to be. And then, I mean, to be fair, that show just I think that knocked me mentally. And I think I've learned, if anything, this year, like the impact of stress and like not feeling comfortable is just like massive, absolutely massive. Because, you know, after that show, I felt like I've been hit by a ton of bricks. Because I've gone from this high of New York Pro, and then I sort of in my head I was like, oh, Milwaukee's like a smaller show, I might maybe do even better. And then instead it was like third call outs, which I think was probably fair. But just that just knocked me. And then I went into Miami, and that's probably the weirdest one of the lot. But I remember, I've said this openly a few times, I remember I called my mum, I think I called my dad, or they called me. I had to G myself up to even go and do that show. I remember driving from my Airbnb to the venue and like having a bit of a pep talk with myself to like say, like, pull yourself together, like you're about to get on stage. I just didn't want to be there. And that was pretty crushing for me, because I was like, oh, is this the end for me in terms of like, if you're not even enjoying getting on stage, like what are you doing it all for? So that was a like pretty harsh realization, but I think it just has to come down to the stress. I remember the change between maybe 2 days out of Miami and then the show pictures. I don't even think I've even posted the show pictures from Miami, mate, because I look like they're probably like, I don't even look like I deserve to be on amateur stage. They're awful. I was embarrassed by them, so embarrassed. So that was a weird one, but I think just a combination of stress and potentially, I remember speaking to Cal just before that show. It's quite an interesting insight actually. I remember saying actually, I was like, Cal, when I used to peak with Rob, we used to sort of eat up into the show and like look at these pictures, like quite clearly it worked. I think the mindset's changed now. I think probably even yours has, in terms of like peaking people as well. And he was like, in his head, he said, I knew what Joe was saying was wrong, but I wanted to see if I could help him enjoy the process a bit more. So he like fed me up into that show, and I just ended up looking like I looked the worst out of all of them. So yeah, that was a shocker. But it was a weird one, mate. It really was a strange experience. I think
it's so funny, man. Like obviously not ha funny. Like, I mean, it's so funny in the fact that one thing that would have worked for you 2 years ago just doesn't work anymore now. Like, and that is, like you say, it's circumstance, it's stress, it's all these factors that people just don't consider. And as an amateur, you think, we'll just do the same thing. We just do the same thing when I become a pro. I'll just do the same thing. But when you've got more tissue than what you've ever had before, when you're in a foreign country, when you're probably not enjoying it as much, when you're like, you know what, like, I'm just gonna do something that I thought worked, and it just doesn't work. Like, you know, from prep to prep, show to show, year to year, like things change so much. And yeah, that's a prime example there.
It's fascinating. So I remember going through that whole process, and I remember comparing how I felt on, you know, at certain times when we were peaking versus how I was feeling this year. And I remember on the days when, I think it was probably in Spain in particular, I still think that's probably one of my best shows ever. Is like waking up on that day and texting you and being like, we're fucking on here. Like, this is just remember waking up feeling full and shredded and just like ready to go. And even then, I think we carried on eating, which even now logically, I'm like, that wasn't the right thing to do. I'm sure you're not like feeding your athletes right up until they get on stage anymore now, because you probably didn't tell me to do it back then, but like, you know, 2-3 hours out, that food's just going to sit in your stomach. You're not realistically metabolizing that. It's not realistically making you feel any fuller. But yeah, I was waking up feeling absolutely on point. So I remember sort of being like, what's changed? So yeah, it's a real weird one, mate. And I think that's one of the pitfalls of bodybuilding is a lot of it just comes down to, like, it's a bit of guesswork, isn't it? We don't have any studies on peaking athletes, really.
Yeah. The only reason, so to be honest, I still do use that method, Joe. Like, I still do use that method, and not for a physical standpoint, but for a mental standpoint. Like, yeah. I know that, to be honest, the hard work's done. You know, when you wake up on the day of the show, the only thing you can really do is fuck it up if you look great. And I use that from a mental standpoint to say, you know what, you've kept feeding into the show. If I all of a sudden take your food away now, you won't get flat, but in your mind, you'll be like, I'm flat.
Yeah.
Flat. And what's that going to do? It's going to send cortisol levels up through the roof, and then that's then going to make you look worse. So I do it in terms of a mental standpoint to say, listen, like I know that we can eat veggies and chicken, or we could do something like that with some fats, keep you nice and dry, or we can just continue to do what we do, which you know works, and then you don't stress. You're like, no, cool, I'm good. Yeah, my chicken and rice, good to go again. So in terms of a process, I still do a very, very similar thing. Just that, again, it's more from, I know that you're going to mentally feel absolutely fine. You're physically not really going to change much in those few hours. But I know that you'll go on stage and you'll feel like, oh, well, I'm full. I've had all these carbs today. I feel good. And then you get on stage and, you do this pump up, which changes you a little bit, but not massively. But you feel like, shit, I'm as full as a house now because I've had all these carbs and stuff like that. So from a standpoint, from me, I always try and look at, right, is it going to make a difference? No, not really. Is it physically? No, not really. Is it mentally going to make a difference? Yeah, it probably could do. So
yeah, it's a really good point. I think it's you can kind of look at all the studies in the world, but then there's no one that's tested this to someone who is in such a high stress environment, and someone who, no one in a lab test is about to do something that literally means the world to them. Do you know what I mean? So one little spike in cortisol, like you say, and suddenly you think you're flat, or you think you're this and you think you're that, and it all just goes to shit. It's a really interesting point. I think even going back to that, and I remember sort of messaging you in Spain on the way, and you were saying don't eat too much, like, maybe like half a muffin, like relax. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense in terms of the mental thing, for sure.
And I know you managed to get an invite to the Arnold's last year, Joe, which is obviously would have been it was a fucking huge production, huge show. Was that difficult for you to turn down?
It was really, really hard. It was more hard on the day when I was there, sat in the audience, looking up at this show and just thinking, this is the best bodybuilding show I've ever seen in my life. I've not been to Olympia. I've not been to any, but after being to like New York Pro and some of these US shows, and then coming back and seeing that on home soil and just thinking, fuck, what a show. It was really hard, and that was like a bitter pill to swallow on the day. But I think in terms of like my rational mind thinking, I don't think I had a choice. I got back home. Obviously, I'd already done prep for, what was it, 4 or 5 months. So you can imagine blood work probably not in a great place. I'd spent that last week as a bit of a like downtime as well, because I was so stressed after that Miami show, and yet I had sort of 4 or 5 days left. I was like, why don't you just go and sort of enjoy yourself a bit? And obviously that meant just loads of food, because I was on my own in Miami. So what else would you do? So I just sort of ate myself into a bit of a coma every day and sat there thinking, what the fuck are you doing? But I had nothing else to do. So that was kind of it. And then I tried to, this is such terrible advice, no one listens to this, but I tried to walk off all that food every day. So I was ended up doing 20,000 steps when obviously your body's absolutely battered anyway. And I got home, don't know whether it's to do with the flight or what, but I was holding a lot of water. I think I ended up having like a cyst in the back of my knee. And I spent the first 3 or 4 days at home just laying on the sofa with my leg up. So I couldn't even move. So when that Arnold's invite came through, for sort of maybe 4, I don't know, when was it, June? Yeah, 4 months out. I was like, well, I have to start prepping a couple of weeks again. And I just wasn't in the space to even, consider doing it. I think if I'd have found that a bit earlier, I might have reconsidered. But I'd almost let go of I didn't think I was going to get the invite, and then it sort of came through. Ian was being quite coy about it, and then I got it when I got home, and I was a bit like, oh fuck. And I did have a think, because I think the day before I'd said to my mum and dad that I'm going to stop my prep now, and then I got that through, and I was like, oh, this is tough. But yeah, the real tough moment was being there and watching it, because it was mind blowing.
Obviously, from a trained eye, Joe, I can obviously see that, to be honest, not on all your shots, but on a couple of your shots, there was a little bit of gyno. Did any of the judges ever say to you, you didn't place as high because of that?
I'll tell you what, I only got feedback from the New York Pro show, and I'm pretty sure they just told me to come in a bit tighter, and there was no mention of gyno. I noticed it on the Milwaukee show. I definitely noticed it on some of the shots there. And then again, probably a bit more on the Miami ones. But like I said, I think I asked for feedback from Milwaukee and never got it. And then Miami, I just didn't even bother because I'm done now. I think a lot of, on social media in particular, I think a lot of people didn't even notice it. I obviously noticed it a lot, and obviously I only posted the shots where I didn't, you know, where I couldn't really see it. I never edited it out or blurred it, but I would, if I saw a shot and I was like, you can see Gyno, then I'm not posting that shot. Do you know what I mean? Not because I was wanting to hide it, because it doesn't look nice. I think I was always quite open with the fact that I was going to have to get it done and stuff like that. So yeah, I never got marked down for it as far as I'm aware. But I think you would. I think you would if it was slightly worse. And I've seen some real bad Gyno. I think if you're going to keep competing and you feel it coming, you've got to get rid of it.
Yeah, no, for sure. So your journey into Classic Duo, have you got some time frames that you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean, Cal, I think we've both been quite open. I've applied for the Arnolds again, and pleaded for him to let me in, and in the hope that I will be able to redeem myself from last year. And I was obviously very apologetic that I couldn't. So I would absolutely love to do the Arnolds. So that's sort of when the prep is sort of aiming for. So I guess it will start in a couple of months' time.
What's your limit, Joe, weight-wise for that?
So I think at the moment, as my height stands at the moment, it's 104. I think with an inversion table, I might be able to get up to like 106. But honestly, I think I'd be under 104 anyway. I've never done any weight manipulation or anything like that. I've never done the sort of classic weight drop. So I can imagine my weight could probably get down quite low, which is quite sort of encouraging. But maybe not too much under. I was 98 this year. 98.3 was the lowest I got to during that prep. So I'd expect to be maybe 101, 102 this year, maybe, which is pretty big, I'd say, but we'll see.
Yeah. Wear a double pair of socks, Joe, when you measure in. 2 pairs of socks when you measure in. Spike that hair up. If you would have had the long hair, you could have combed it back. And
yeah, could have done.
Yeah.
2 pairs of socks.
Great for the show. Great for the show. But no, that's great, man. It'd be great to see you on that stage at the Arnolds. And what an incredible place to make a classic debut, man. Like that would be, immense.
Yeah, fingers crossed. We'll see if they let me in. I hope so. I hope I'm not upset.
I think it's April. I think the invites come out in April.
I've sent it off, so we'll see.
Yeah, no, good luck, man. I hope that all goes well for you, bud. But yeah, no, that's great, Joe. I really appreciate your time, mate, and I'm conscious of the time. If people want to contact you, Joe, for advice on training, are you doing posing coaching, Joe, or are you just still doing just the online coaching stuff?
Yeah, just coaching now. To be fair, I send anyone for posing to Isaac still.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, contact me is just at Brightman _ on Instagram. That's where I'm most active. So
awesome. Joe, thanks ever so much for your time. I really appreciate it, mate. And as I said, I'm sure the listeners got something out of this for sure, because I did as well. Thanks, Joe. Take care.
Cheers, mate.